Okay. Hey.
Has anybody asked anybody about Manny's? I didn't know. I was going to see if Jonathan wanted to,
Nobody has
or
mentioned
Jay,
it to me. Jay won't be here.
if he wanted to assist and do closing prayer. I don't know if anybody will ask anybody.
Yeah, William's doing song leading this morning because Jay's not here. So we've got Jay and
And
Danny. You're not down for anything, are you?
I'm doing
Oh,
the Lord's
your
table.
Lord's table. Okay.
So I don't know. I'll go ask him.
I don't mind assisting.
Okay. Do you
If
want
we
me
need
to
to
see
do
if
that.
Jonathan will
Sure.
do the closing prayer?
Yeah. Appreciate it. Okay. Awesome. Hey. Let me see if he'll assist. Good morning. We are in 1 Timothy, finishing up the questions on chapter 2. Does anybody need a book? I have several up here. Anyone need a workbook? All right. That means you're all ready and prepared and questions are filled out, right? All right. I believe we finished our fill in the blanks, and so we're now on to the true false, and then we're going to get into chapter 3. All right. We're on page 5 in the workbook. It's the one that looks like this with the pink banner. True false on chapter 2 of 1 Timothy. Question number 1, we should pray for rulers of the land that we might lead a quiet and peaceable life. True, that's right. One of the first things we talked about there was there in verses 1 and 2. All right, question number 2. Since a woman is commanded not to teach nor usurp authority over the man, she cannot even sing because in songs we teach one another. False. All right. Question number 3. God wants all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. True. Absolutely. Question number 4. In this chapter, Jesus is called a man. True. That's in verse 5. And then question 5. This chapter teaches that a Christian woman's good works should attract more attention than her gold, pearls, and costly array. True. All right. I think y'all got 100% on that true-false section. Great job. All right, we're going to get into chapter 3 now. 1 Timothy chapter 3. There is, if you've looked ahead, if you've worked in your workbook, you'll see there is a lot of material here in our book before we really ever dig into the chapter. And that's just kind of setting up where we're headed with this chapter. So we are going to have several opportunities to read. So hopefully I'll have some readers available this morning and willing. But I'll I'll go ahead and read some of these questions, or some of this, I guess it's not even questions for the most part, this background material, as it's called. But what we look at, if you're looking at, in your Bible, if you have headings above each chapter, I know in this one, in this King James that I'm using, there are some headings, and it says, the qualifications of elders and deacons. And so that's where a lot of this background information is going to come from, looking at elders and deacons. We're also, if you're familiar with your New Testament and you know, well, we're looking, this study is a systematic study of 1 Timothy through Hebrews. Elders and deacons are going to come up more than just right here. We're going to look in 1 Timothy at elders. We're going to look in Titus at elders. We're going to even look in some passages in Hebrews that give some directions around elders. And so when we get to it in the workbook, he really covers a lot of different aspects, but then we're going to revisit it. And so at least 2 more times in this study. All right, let's go ahead and look. I'm going to read just kind of this little background material, and then we'll look and discuss some of it. Here at, I guess, what we would normally call question 1, it says, since the first 7 verses of this chapter deal with the eldership, and since this subject is of such importance to the church, perhaps you would be interested in the following information. So, let's go ahead and read 1 Timothy 3, verses 1 through 7, and then look at this additional information it gives us. 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 7. This is a true saying. If a man desires the office of a bishop, he desires a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not given to wine, no striker, not greedy for filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, but not covetous, one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride, he falleth into condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them who are without, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. So those first 7 verses referenced there in that question number 1 are those on the qualifications of what King James says there is bishop. Does anybody else, any other translations in that verse 1 and 2, other than bishop, have any other words? Overseer. Okay, bishop, overseer. The word bishop means overseer. All right. So what, not thinking religiously right now, but what is an overseer? If you're thinking out, even out in the world, like let's take the church out of our minds for a minute when we're thinking about this definition. But what is an overseer? A manager, okay? That's a good word. What else? Holds responsibility, okay? Good. Anything else? All right. Was there something? Caretaker. Okay, great. Now, when I, in my work, sometimes we'll have people that oversee a project. Now, sometimes that project, and some of the teens have already heard some of this recently in one of their classes, but when we assign an overseer, sometimes I will assign overseers of a project. Sometimes I'm assigned to be an overseer of a project. And you may think, okay, yeah, well, manager, right? A manager of that project. Well, yes, sometimes it is very much management. Sometimes that project is already underway. Sometimes it has been going on for a while, and they need somebody to be able to take that reporting responsibility. Somebody that the executive leadership wants to be able to go to and say, tell me about this project. Tell me about this thing that got started. There was a problem and they've been working on this project to find a solution. It's already been going on for a while, but they need somebody to reach out to that can speak to it, okay? And so that person is sometimes overseeing. Now, sometimes when I get a project at work that I'm an overseer of, that thing is running great. And you know, if I was to really grab the reins of it and just take over every aspect of that project, it would probably not run so great. Because it's already moving, it's already going. Now, they need somebody there for accountability, somebody to almost say, all right, this is starting to get outside the bounds of what the company wants us working on. And so, well, since that they would be the one to kind of say, okay, hey, let's keep in line with the company's goals and values and our mission here, right? And then continue to let them, as long as they're not breaking policy, continue to let them function, overseeing that thing. Now, sometimes we assign overseers because there's already a big problem. And that overseer needs to come in and get those things back on track, right? All right, hey, this is already way off. It's a good project, though. And it can really serve a good purpose for the company. And so let's get an overseer there to make sure that they continue that way, because there's some kind of risky things here going on, right? Now, that's kind of how, when I think of overseer, where my mind goes, right? An elder, a bishop, an overseer, doesn't necessarily come in and just take the reins of everything. Sometimes if they do that, I've seen where, all right, they think they just have to grab everything and control every little piece. It starts really falling apart. And maybe some of you have seen that same type of situation. So think overseer here. Bishop, this is one that oversees it. This is one that makes sure that it stays within the guidelines. Now, these guidelines are a lot more important than some project at work, right? So it's kind of a weak comparison there, but just to get our minds set on overseer and what might be kind of described here when we're talking bishop. Now, what we're going to see as we look at this information here in our book is that a bishop is an elder. These are different words to describe the same office, and we'll look at that word office later too. Let's go ahead and look at 1a, and it'll probably explain it a little better than I'm trying to right now. It says, 3 Greek words give us 6 English words, all used to designate the eldership. And so first we have presbyteros, which is the word we get elder and presbyter. And so the word here used in 1 Timothy to where the office of I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the next one. The word here is not presbyteros right here. Now we will see it come up more in our study though. This next word, episkopos, which comes from bishop and overseer. So that would be the word used here in 1 Timothy 3:1. Episkopos, okay? And then poimen, now that one I may be saying wrong, from which we get pastor and shepherd. All right, so just looking at these words, just looking at what these Greek words mean can tell us a lot about the role of an elder. Now look at that poimen. We get pastor and shepherd. Okay, what is a shepherd? One that oversees the flock, right? So there's that oversee word again, right? They're all describing the same office. This is an overseer of the flock. What was the purpose of a shepherd, especially back around this time, around the first century. Keep the sheep from getting eaten. That's a good way to describe it, right? Without a shepherd, those sheep are at a big risk, right? We know about wolves in sheep's clothing, right? We studied that not too long ago. And so, hey, there is all sorts of dangers out there. And so this poimen, pastor or shepherd, is to keep those sheep from getting eaten, keep them from getting consumed by the world, right? Now, I get called pastor by people that are not a member of this church at times, right? Are they right in calling me pastor? No, they're not, right? It's one of those words that people have said, you know what? Let's break these 3 Greek words up and kind of just make our own structure here. And so they'll say, well, I don't know all the structure. A bishop is higher than an elder, and the pastor, he's that one that leads the church through preaching. I don't get angry when I correct people for calling me pastor, because I know it's a term that the religious world has kind of just twisted into the wrong thing. Now, I do, if somebody in the church calls me pastor, I try to correct them. People have slipped and said that before. But we need to make sure that, look, just a pastor and a shepherd are not, or a pastor and an elder are not one and the same. Yes, they are. A pastor and a preacher are not one and the same. Now I'm getting confused and twisted up. All right, we may come back to some of these scriptures, but I do want to keep on moving here. Somebody turn to Acts chapter 11, verse 30. Acts chapter 11, verse 30. And when you get there, if you would, go ahead and read it. So here in Acts chapter 11, we're talking about the funds that were being collected, right, to help, I believe, the church in Jerusalem there. And it says here, the elders of the church are first mentioned in Acts chapter 11, verse 30, where we learn that relief was sent to the brethren in Judea, but sent first to the elders by the hands of who? Barnabas and Saul. All right, Barnabas and Saul. And then it makes this point here. This shows the elders were already functioning, though this is the first time they are mentioned. So in Acts 11, in the church, there was already some elderships, okay? This is before 1 Timothy was written, right? And so we see, okay, this was not, 1 Timothy isn't the first time that this idea of elders comes up. They were already established there, in some of the churches at least, in Acts chapter 11, verse 30. So, well, how did they know how to pick them? How did they know how to appoint these men if it's not mentioned in Scripture? In Acts 11:30, how did they know before 1 Timothy and Titus were written who could be an elder? Yeah, the apostles, right? Everything the apostles ever said isn't recorded, right? Or if everything those 12 men ever said was recorded, we would never get a Bible through the doors of the church building, right? What we need is recorded, but what we see here is, hey, the apostles would have already taught at least that church, or those churches that had elders, how to select these men. All right, let's go on to see. In Acts 14:23, somebody turn to Acts chapter 14:23, just a few chapters over. so we learned that elders became recognized as elders by being what? Appointed. And this was done in what church? Every church. Okay, so every church appointed these men as elders. All right, let's go to D. The elders of the Lord's church are not to be confused with the elders of Israel mentioned so many times throughout the Bible. See, this is where sometimes some confusion can be generated, is you might read that word elder, and it's not talking about the elders of the church. There would have been different elders, specifically the elders of Israel. And so, again, that's where reading the context of verses is very important. All right, so there's some additional source material here. We're not going to take the time this morning to read through all of these, but I highly recommend you look up those verses. 1 Titus 1, 5 through 9, Acts 20, 28, 1 Peter 5, 1 through 3, and it says, let's see, possibly Hebrews 13, 17, and 1 Thessalonians 5, 12. So look those up on your own. We'll probably come back to those verses at least when we get into where we're in Titus, and we look at this again. All right, so let's continue. I'm going to reread verses 1 and 2 of 1 Timothy chapter 3. It says, "This is a true saying, if a man desires the office of a bishop, he desires a good work. A bishop must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, and apt to teach." So when we come down to this question number 2, this thought question, it says, what is meant by the word office in verse 17? So somebody read verse 17 for me. No volunteers? Yeah, there's there's not a verse 17. And so it's really, but we did just read that word office there at the beginning of chapter 3. So let's look at, when we look at verse 1 of chapter 3 instead of verse 17. What is meant by the word office in verse 1? I think it's supposed to be 1 through 7, and they put 17. So what does office mean there? What's that? Appointment, okay. We did just read that elders were appointed in every church. Position, okay. All right, so appointment, position. I really like to look at this as it is used in this verse. It says, desires the office of a bishop. He desires a good work. And so what I like to look at is how is this office being described in verse 1? As a work, right? It's work. It's a work. It's something you do, right? The position, now while it is an appointment, and the way we think of things, it is position. I'm not a huge fan of the word position there, because when we think of position, like if I came up to you and said, "Hey, I got a new position at work," you'd think, "Well, I got a raise, right? I got promoted," and it is very important. But I like to think of it more as a work than a promotion, right? There are some. Well, think through the Bible. There are some very influential, very prominent people in the Bible that would never qualify for this office, right? That I would say had a very important position within the kingdom. Can you think of any that wouldn't qualify to be an elder? Moses. Okay. Yeah, why? Do what? Well, he actually had more than one wife. We read about. So, who else? How about New Testament? Who wouldn't qualify to be an elder that is very influential in the New Testament? Jesus? Paul? Yeah. Yeah, the man writing this wouldn't even qualify, right? Now that doesn't mean he was less of a Christian, right? There's still a very important. Can you imagine if Paul would have thought, well, since I don't qualify, I'll just kind of take a back seat to all this and watch how things go. Well, we'd be missing a huge chunk of our Bibles, wouldn't we, if that was the case? And so, again, I don't think it's, the word here, office, I like to think of as that's the work they're taking on. Now, it is also, you could say position or appointment, but I like to drill into that work there. All right, let's continue. Question number 3. The work of an elder is called a what work? Good. It's a good work. Okay. Question number 4. Now we may need to, this one, if you haven't done your homework, this one might take some time and we may be kind of all over the place here, but that's all right. Question number 4, using the first chapter of Titus, along with this chapter, make a list of the positive requirements of an elder in one column and another list of the negative requirements in a second column. Then it says thusly, but I don't ever use that word. All right. Anybody, from what we read, and I'll try to mark some as we go. What are some of the positive qualities? And if we miss one, we'll try to go back and catch them all. Let's start with the positive. What are some of the positive requirements, something an elder must have? Blameless. All right. Blameless. Okay, let's name some more. Self-controlled. Good. What else? Husband of one wife. Good. Hospitable. Okay, given to hospitality, hospitable. Trustworthy. Able to teach. What version do you have? Does it say able there? Okay, able to teach. What else? Not violent. All right. Not a striker. Not violent. Okay. Faithful children. Faithful listed there in Titus. Okay. Sober. Okay. Not covetous. All right, good. We missing any? Lover of good men. Oh, that's great. Yep, that's in there. Okay. Patient. Yep. Okay. Greedy for money or not greedy. Well, that would be on our negatives, I think. I don't know. That could be a positive. Some of them are going to go both ways. So we'll say not greedy for money. All right, let's look at some of the negatives. All right. What are some things that they're told he must not be? Not greedy for money, right? Or filthy lucre is, I think, how the King James uses it there. I kind of like saying filthy lucre. So, what else? Not given to wine. Okay. No striker. Well, yeah, that you don't beat up on Jerry. Yeah. Yeah, we'll look at that one more, but yes, yeah. Not a striker. Okay, what else? Not a novice. Okay. We said not covetous earlier. Not soon angry. Yep, quarrelsome. Yep, or not soon angry. Yeah. Not arrogant. We missing any? Not double-tongued. Okay. Not self-willed. I think that's in Titus, right? Is that also in 1 Timothy? We're looking at both, so I'm just making sure. I have some marked as Titus, but that doesn't mean it's not in both. All right, that's pretty good. Now, we could honestly, depending on your translation, we might be able to continue going on because a lot of these things are translated differently, but they mean the same thing. Now, a few that I want to look at real quick. We said not given to wine is one of the nots. And we also said sober as one of the things he must be. Are these not the same thing? I've got no, it's not the same. Okay, what does this mean? What does it mean to be sober? A clear mind. That's right. Yeah, now, if you're given to wine, you also don't have a clear mind, right? But it means so much more. In today's society, we say, oh, they're 10 years sober. And we know what we're talking about there. We know that it's been 10 years since they have had alcohol, right? But I think because of things like that, we limit what sober is. You cannot abuse a single substance or use a single sinful substance in your life and still not be sober, can't you? Yeah. You've got to have a clear mind. A lot of the things that we look at come down to, are you self-controlled? Can they control themselves? Patient, right? Again, a lot of these play on one another. If somebody is patient, then they've at least got that part of their mind clear, right? They know how to endure. Somebody who doesn't have a clear mind probably isn't going to be patient. So somebody that can think through things correctly. All right. Bonnie brought up or asked the question about the striker. Okay. So just don't hit anybody, right? I mean, I would say that would be a pretty clear tale that person's probably not qualified. Oh, we are. Yes. Absolutely. Somebody who's just real quick to retaliate, right? And you can. Some translations don't say striker. They'll group that in with like the violence, right? But not a strike. Not quick to retaliate. Yeah, if you're sober minded, you're going to have that under control. I think of the most sober minded person to ever walk this earth is Jesus, right? Think of the self control. I mean, he could have struck them with 10 legions of angels, right? But instead, he went to the cross, right? Now, again, there's very few people that are going to be able to be that sober. But when you think of being sober, it is, hey, when the attacks are coming, you still keep your head about you. You still are able to reason through this. You're still able to not stoop to the point of sin, right? Of retaliation here. That striker, that retaliation, that violence that some might respond with. some of the questions, well, let's go ahead. We'll come back to it. We're going to be on this chapter for probably 3 or 4 weeks. And so we'll come back just for time's sake, and since the first bell already rang, let's look at question 5. What does apt to teach mean? So King James says apt to teach is one of the qualifications. What does it mean to be apt to teach? Yeah. Mm. I, I don't know. Yeah. Right. Okay. It is. It is a scary thing. It is scary from so many points to teach in the way you're saying, right? Generally, when you enter into a Bible study with somebody, you already care about them, right? That is what has driven you to that point. And to me, the scary part is I'm going to share with this person the truth, and they may not like it. And their reaction to this truth may forever impact my relationship with them, right? That is the scary part. Like, I don't want to mess this up, right? What if I approach this wrong, and they reject Christianity forever because I've approached this wrong, right? That's the struggle. But am I still apt? Am I still able to push through that and still teach despite those things? Now, for others, they're afraid they're going to get tongue-tied. They know they're excited about it. I'm not going to be able to get the right words out, right? And maybe that's what holds them back. Okay, what I feel like, and maybe this is some of the conversation you mentioned you've had with people, is a lot of times we see apt to teach, and we say, all right, has this person ever taught a Bible class? Right, like in church, have they taught a Bible class? If they haven't, then they're obviously not able to teach, right? And that's where our minds go. Now, what I would like us to think about is how many opportunities in the early church were there to teach the Sunday morning Bible class in Ephesus, in Corinth, right? Likely not a whole lot, right? Maybe there was. We do know part of the problem in Ephesus that Paul is telling Timothy is there are people teaching that have no business doing it. But that's some things for you to think about. Think about, before next Sunday, think about what is apt to teach. What did it mean in the first century? And does that still have the same meaning today? And let's try to discuss that starting off next Sunday. We've got a lot of things to dissect here, but this is one of those interesting ones that a lot of people get hung up on.